Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm Julie Livingston of Want Leverage Communications, here from the next episode of PR Patter. I'm so excited today because I've just gotten into podcasting myself. And so I've got a real expert with me today. Welcome to E.B. Moss. E.B. is a strategist, podcaster, and marketer who creates content designed to open revenue doors and humanize brands, which is so important today to make that audience connection. Named among the top 10 most fascinating B2B marketers of 2020, she was inaugural editor of marketing publication The Continuum and contributes explanatory journalism to the customer.net, Synopsis, and Media Village. EB profiles media and marketing executives on her podcast, Insider Interviews with EB Moss. And through her award-winning marketing consultancy, Moss Appeal, EB has generated compelling collateral and promotions from major media companies and nonprofits. So welcome, EB.
Thank you, Julie.
Today we're going to talk about how to bring personality and value to your podcast. But let's start at the beginning. How did you start podcasting? How did you get into it yourself?
Well, thanks for having me. And it's very awkward to hear your own bio read back to you.
So it is, isn't it? You're like,
thank you. Yay. Jazz hands. How did I get into it? I'm the daughter of a radio broadcaster. So I tell people I was raised in the press box because he was also a sportscaster. And, word of mouth and storytelling has always been sort of what I was raised on. And so I was working after a series of running ad sales marketing. That's a key right there, at some major media companies, including a rep firm called Ad Large. I worked with the team that did the go-to-market strategy for podcasting, which this was about 10 years ago. So it was still much more nascent than it was now, and it's still pretty nascent. And I learned a lot. And then I took a role as the managing editor of Media Village on the auspices that I would also help build out their audio content and their coverage of audio companies like, Odyssey and Westwood One.
Right.
And so Jack Myers, the CEO, said to me, all right, then go build a podcast. And I was like, I've only ever talked about it. I've only ever marketed one. What? So I really taught myself from the ground up, and 200 something episodes and 6 shows later, here we are.
That's so great. It's really an inspiration. First of all, I think, what I'm learning and developing this podcast is that you learn as you go. And, that's okay. Like, this is an evolution. You may not have everything together in the beginning, but it's really creating that compelling content that people really want to listen to and that they'll get some value from. So tell us about brand personality and how you kind of weave that into a podcast and why that's important.
Yeah. Well, I think that whatever your brand is, it has to stand out. It has to shine. You and I actually have a friend in common named Stacy Thal, and she does some brand strategy, etc. And Stacy talks about how you do you, right? You have to stand out from the competition by standing for something.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with that. So there's brand personality, and then there's how you're going to inject it in every touch point along the way. So you have to have consistency. And from my perspective, people buy from people they like. And do they like your brand personality? Are you communicating it well? So I think that word of mouth is one of the strongest tools that you have to communicate your brand product, your brand value, etc. And guess what's most perceived as word of mouth? Audio. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So what is the difference between a B2B podcast and a branded podcast?
Yeah. So that's a really, really good question and an important differentiation. Um, a branded podcast typically is one that is underwritten by a company. So one of my favorite examples, because I think it's great storytelling, is Trailblazers with Walter Isaacson.
Uh,
And guess what? That's brought to you by Dell. Now, Walter Isaacson is not out there shilling for go buy a Dell computer, but he's talking about innovative technology. So they're shoulder rubbing the brand values that Dell is trying to communicate through storytelling. A B2B podcast and that could be a B2B podcast. You know, you might get more of a technical storytelling one, but typically I think of a B2B podcast as one that is a little bit more focused on the brand itself. Now, a really important element is that you don't want your podcast to be a sales brochure. And that's what I
Not
kind
at
of
all.
want
That's a
to.
very good way to lose audience
That's
share.
right. And that's where personality comes in, right? So, and that's where what you first asked me about, what is your brand personality? How do you infuse it? So I think you can't be afraid to communicate that in a way that's consistent with your brand, especially in audio. You have the best microphone, so to speak, the best stage to do that, to really communicate who your executives are. And at the risk of boring you instead of being, you know, more personality, I'll keep going. So
Please.
one of my favorite phrases and one of the things that I try personally to do is to humanize executives, right? So it goes way back to the top of people buy from people they like. So there is a particular foible with B2B podcasts. And sometimes companies will say, we have to feature our SVP or our CEO. And bless their hearts, they might be like watching paint dry. So you
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
necessarily.
I mean, I go through this in creating, LinkedIn content for C-level
Yeah,
executives and also my publicity work. You need to have the right type of personality
yeah,
to really be attractive to audiences and the media.
yeah, exactly. So how do you elicit that from them?
Yeah.
I happen to know a very good media trainer, and people can connect with me, and I'll sick her on you if you need one.
That's great. That's great. So we talked about the difference between having a B2B podcast and a branded one.
Mhm.
How do you, beyond that, how do you distinguish your podcast? How do you put your stamp on it?
Yeah, and I guess that's what we're supposed to talk about today. So let me think. You have to prepare. So
Right.
I happen to do a training for companies who want to launch their first B2B podcast. Did I mention that? Yes, contact me, podcasts at
Yeah.
mossappeal.com. But the first slide in my training talks about no more boardrooms, but BORED, right? So, how do you distinguish yourself from being a snooze fest? And it starts with creating engaging content. You might be talking about widgets, but how do you storytell about widgets? How do you draw in your audience? It goes back to that thing of don't make a sales brochure. So typically, your B2B podcast will likely be an interview show. You might be, I say this kindly, sucking up to your customers by featuring them as a guest. Research your guest. Find something interesting about that guest. Maybe they were on their curling team in college, or maybe they just won a weirdo award. I don't know, but
Yeah.
bring that up.
That's a great icebreaker too. I think, in having conversations on your podcast to really, come up with something that's going to spark the conversation with the guest.
Exactly. I also like to disarm my guests. I prepare, I read, were they on the curling team, etc. And I promised when I promoted this live stream on Twitter that I would explain the answer to what happens when the skeleton walks into a bar. It's my favorite joke, Julie. Skeleton walks
And
into a bar,
okay.
asks for a drink and a mop. Okay, think about it. Pours through him. So he's prepared. She's prepared. Okay, work with me here. So you have to prepare. You have to think like the skeleton at the bar. What's the next step? So I personally like to outline. I write the way I speak. I'm also a writer. And I like to infuse personality into my explanatory journalism as well. So I tend to write out a lot of my intros. But one really good thing is to just start to roll tape. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So one example is an interview I did with Claude Silver. She's the chief heart officer of VaynerMedia and terrific personality. So I started singing to her. You gotta have heart. I sang to Carl Fremont about "Come Fly With Me"
Right.
because we were flying home on a plane together and we were talking about that. But I like to roll tape and see what they talk about and then incorporate that into the episode. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great tip. And something that is easily done, I think.
Maybe not
With
the singing part. That's
maybe
true.
not the singing part.
It's not for
But
everyone.
certainly the research,
That's right.
the advanced research. So what are some of the things that you've learned along the way that you could share with our viewers today about, really hitting a home run in podcasting?
Yeah, well, I think it always starts with understanding the key points that you want to make. So, as I said, even if it's just to gain a comfort level and to add some personality to your podcast, writing things out, but understand that you can have a story arc even to a B2B podcast.
Sure.
Think about the hero journey. How do you make your guest the hero? And thank you for doing that with me so far. You're a lovely host.
Thank you.
And what's the key takeaway that you want people to have? That's also really important. I want people to walk away or listen and walk. The beauty of podcasting,
Right.
and leave with some good takeaways. So, what's the end? What's the fairy tale ending of each episode? What are they going to leave with? And also, how do you bring out that surprise element? And just by being comfortable yourself, I think people will reveal more. So have your questions prepared. What I do is I, of course, research my guest. I research their company. I want them to shine. But then I also ask them what they most want to be asked. You and I did that a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yep.
that is so helpful. And, I realize that some people might find that odd or weird
Mhm.
that, you're asking, what are some of the discussion prompts you'd like me to
That's right.
incorporate into our conversation today? I don't know, that for EB, that's been kind of a regular part of what I'm doing in this little broadcast. I always ask my guests that. And sometimes they don't have the time or they can't answer.
Yep.
And I will come up with some and send it to them in advance and say, what do you think of this? And they'll weigh in.
Yeah. Also in my podcast training, we talk about, well, there's prep, there's promotion, there's production quality. And you
Ah,
have your headphones on. I've got my lovely Shure MV7.
we've
And
got well, this is video too. So we've got our ring lights on.
that's
We
right.
got to have decent lighting.
That's right. And you would be stunned at the deficit, the harm that some executives, major executives, do by not even having, you can use your little AirPods, and it's not bad. A mic is better, but have something that puts you in your best, as you said, light,
Yeah.
both audio and visually.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Do all that you can to set yourself up for success
Yeah.
and keep refining it. Again, I'm relatively new at this. I've been doing it for about 8 months now. And every week I feel like I'm learning something new to elevate this show
Yep.
more and more. Certainly in the promotion of it, even though I'm a publicist, sometimes I'm like the cobbler with no shoes.
Yeah.
And so you actually gave me such great ideas in how to promote this podcast that I'm going to now use going forward. And I thank you for that.
Yeah.
But, I think try not to judge yourself too much, and just look at this as a learning process and something that you can easily, that's the beauty of digital media, right? You can
Right.
constantly let it evolve and keep switching it up and trying new things.
Yeah.
Um, how do you identify guests? Because I realize that I have a pretty big contact network, and
Mhm.
I actually like cold calling people when I need to. I know that's weird, but I've always liked cold calling. Um, how do you identify guests, and how would you do you have any tips or directions that would help people to do that, because that could be very daunting,
Yes.
because I do find that I need to plan my guest roster way in advance. I mean, I'm booked right now through, I think, through August, so that really helps me. And then sometimes people have to cancel it. That really helps me. You forget how quickly time flies, and you want to get something on people, on the calendar
Right.
with your guests, and people are busy. So how do you identify the right people for your podcast?
Well, you as a publicist, I think you could answer this question better. Me as a recipient of pitches, I'll answer it from my perspective. Do your homework. Oh my. I cannot tell you the weirdo pitches that I've gotten to be on insider interviews. Um, and there are people who, will do the autofill and an email blast. There are a lot of people who are calling me by my last name. So that's an immediate clue to delete. I don't even read it.
No,
I
no,
got on
oh my
some
God,
list.
that's embarrassing. Yeah,
Yeah, but listen to the episode that, you're trying to pitch your guest for. So that's on the, your book. That's awesome on the soliciting guests part. So, that's part of the prep is understand what's going to add value to your show, why you want to have that guest on. As I said, you know, jokingly, but sort of seriously, who are the customers you want to suck up to, and put them in their best light? They're going to share that with their coworkers or their mom or whatever. So it's sort of like the vanity plate, license plate. If it's going to do a service for you, great, but make sure that whoever you're bringing on is not going to drag down the quality of your show either. But then again, it comes back to you doing
yeah,
your homework and,
yeah.
bringing that out in them.
I would suggest also, looking at, let's say you have somebody in mind,
Mhm.
somebody or know peripherally. See if you could find any evidence of their speaking style
Yeah,
online. If they've been in other videos, that
that's
gives
right.
you it could give you a good idea of if they're doing, if the podcast is on camera, what their speaking style is. How do they articulate well? Are they conversational? Like, do they have that kind of
Yep,
spark in their personality that forms connections with others instantly? I mean, that's going to be an important barometer. But when you choose a guest,
that's right.
and if somebody, there are a lot of people out there who do lots and lots of podcast interviews. Do you want them to speak on the topic that they are most known for, or do you want to skew it a little differently? Again, that could be kind of a differentiator for your show.
Yep. What's the intent of your show? I did one show for a company that was 5 questions in 10 minutes. I did a show for another agency that was interviewing just their clients and gave them sort of a platform to explain it because it was more tech oriented. So that was a service to them. You always I'm surprised at myself that I didn't start with page 1 of this, Beyond No More Boardrooms. But the first thing that I always tell people in starting a podcast is, why do you want to start a podcast?
Exactly. What's your
You
why? Yeah.
Exactly. And then what's the WIFM? The what's in it for me as the listener. You nail those 2 things and you know who your prospective listener is. You don't have to pay me, but if you do want to pay me, it's podcasts@mossappeal.com. Okay, thank you very much. I'll be here through Thursday.
So okay, you're ready to start a podcast. Maybe you come up with a cute name for it that is searchable, right?
But yes, good point. And that's page number 4. Yes, your design, everything should be a reflection of your brand, right? We started with that brand personality discussion. And it might be a balancing act. Your podcast might be the place where you can be a little less stodgy, where you can sort of let your freak flag fly, so to speak. Does that date me? Maybe a little.
That's okay.
Okay. But perhaps online or on your site, you're a little bit more formal. But again, you want to elicit the personality of your executives. You want to humanize your executives. They are your mouthpiece, they're your megaphone about your company. So, it might be that your VP of sales is a much better interviewer speaker than your chief revenue officer. Don't just make your CRO the host of the podcast.
No.
Think about the power of personality.
Yeah. And how you could interact with that person and really kind of bring it, to another level. Right. Right. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think that there's 2 things I want to add that are very important. Manage your expectations. There are 5 million podcasts out there now. Yay. About 500 of them make any money. This is not about earning ad money or anything like that. You might get 500 people listening if you're lucky. Think about that, why you're doing it. And so that's part 2. You're managing your expectations and you're remembering that this is another form of your sales collateral. So what the value of your podcast is slicing and dicing it. You're going to create a transcript. You might use AI to do that, by the way. I'll drop a couple of names for you because I believe in good takeaways. Think about Swell AI or Capsho, CAPSHO. There are a lot of companies out there who are now leveraging AI to help you take your transcription and turn it into good show notes.
Oh, I love that. I love
Then
that.
take your show notes, turn them into a blog post on your site. Did I mention that you can hire me to do that? Okay.
I think you did, yeah.
Then
But you can mention it again.
Promo spots, clips. There's a service called Headliner that can dice your long form interview into a 30 or 60-second audiogram. Create spin-off articles. You guest on other shows, right? So once you've proven yourself to have the power of personality as a host, be out there. Thank you very much, Julie Livingston, for having me as a guest to evangelize insider interviews with Moss Appeal. See how that works? So things like that.
I love
It's all
that.
about
I just
slicing
love
and
that. You're
dicing.
just twisting and turning and
That's it.
reshaping and recreating the content to
Yep.
give it a lot of longevity and tremendous value.
Yeah. Because you,
Wow.
me, and your mom are going to be the ones listening to
Right.
the podcast in the beginning.
EB, I can't thank you enough for being a guest with me today. This was such a fascinating conversation.
Thank you,
The
Julie.
wheels are spinning. I've already gotten like 4 takeaways that I'm going to put to
Awesome.
use right away. So I hope you'll come back again sometime.
Oh, thank you.
And I'll be back again next week with another episode of PR Patter.
Thanks, Julie.